Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. And have we got a treat for you today? You know, I always say this, right? I always talk about having lovely people on the show because we only have great people. Today, we're doing something completely different. Claire, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, she's a mentor of mine. I love her books. I love her podcast. I love her courses. I'm doing one of the courses at the moment. She's a coach, and she's got a really unique and clear way of helping us see who we truly are. So I asked Claire if she'd come on the podcast, and she said, yeah, she'd be honored to. And like my heart leapt, because I'm just thinking, well, I'm bringing somebody into this adoption space that's got a really unique take. So thanks a lot for saying that you'd come on.
Thank you, Simon. What a lovely intro. Thank you.
Yeah. So Claire's a coach, right? She works across, people with all sorts of different challenges. Have you done apart from the stuff? Have you done any work with any other adoptees, or is it just me that's come into your space with the adoption stuff?
Yeah, just you specifically on adoption. Yes. Yeah.
So we were talking, listeners, before we started about a kicking off point for this conversation with Claire and I. And we looked at a few different options, and the one that we came up with was the primal wound. So the primal wound is one of the kind of the dominant books in the adoption space. Is written by an adoptive mum in the 90s, a lady, an MD, a medical doctor, or what we would call in the UK a GP. And she had two daughters, one biological and one adopted. And she noticed some differences between those two. And she came up with this theory of the primal wound, which is essentially the trauma of separation between a child and his or her mother. And I was recommended that book when I was struggling a few years ago. And I read that book and I thought, this explains everything, right? This explains everything. So this explains why I am why I fear rejection, why I want to control things, and those kind of like emotional, some of the tougher emotions that we go through. And I started telling out. I didn't know many adoptees at that stage. So I asked my sister to read it. I kind of pleaded with a friend of mine who's adopted to read it. I got my coach to read it at the time, and it made so much sense. And then I talked to a few people about it, especially my coach, Liz, and she said, well, Simon, I wanted to be adopted because, she was abused by her dad. She wanted to be adopted. And what Nancy Berriot seems to be writing about is characteristics and feelings that all people go through, whether they're adopted or not. And this kind of like, I saw that I saw that I hadn't believed that I was wounded until I read The Primal Wound. And then that belief became like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I talk a lot about like a trauma ball. So it's a bit like a snowball. We scoop up some snow from the ground. We make it into a size of an egg, and then we put it back on the ground and we start rolling it, and it gets bigger and bigger, and then it's the base of a snowman, a snow woman, or a snow person in these gender concerned times. And so the trauma gets worse. Or another way of looking at this is kind of like we're going down a dark hole of trauma, and it gets darker and darker the further we go down that. We go down that down that hole. And the darker life gets, the more tricky it is to see where we're going, and we bump into stuff and we have more problems in our life. And at a certain point, I'm not quite sure when, I realized that I needed to, instead of going further down the trauma hole, I needed to turn around and see the light that was still available, because I wasn't that far down. And what I see in the adoption community, and especially in adult adoptees, is they're going further and further down that trauma hole. And when they turn around, if they turn around, they can't see any light whatsoever. And it just gets darker, and the world gets tougher for them. So that's really my take on the primal wound metaphor, and what Claire and I are going to do, which is basically have a conversation around that, and she will, and we'll see where it goes. That's what we do with all the guests that come.
Yeah. So yeah, I love how you articulate it. Very clear. So I guess the question maybe that we're looking at is well, maybe a couple of questions. What goes on in childhood that is creating or creating a setup for suffering as we move through life? And I really like what you're saying about it not being unique to adoption. There are things that go on in childhood for all of us, that not for all of us, but for many of us, that create a feeling of being fractured and isolated and cut adrift somehow. And then what is the role of life, I guess? What's the role of living in terms of either the healing of that sense of being disrupted from our flourishing flow, and either in healing it, or how does it happen, like you're saying, when people just go further and deeper down the tunnel of suffering, and things just seem to be amplifying the more we investigate. So I think for me those are the two really interesting areas, is what causes the problem space in the first place, and what do we do then with it? Where do we go with that then? Because I think the conversation that Simon and I are in at the moment is we could loosely call it non-duality, I guess, or spirituality, or exploration of reality. And there's a risk within that this experience in the body that these children have gone through becomes spiritually bypassed in this. So I think within our watch out for this whole conversation that we have is that we don't try and deny things just so that they fit nicely into some spiritual framework, that we really that this is a really healing space in which experience can genuinely be looked at and held and honored, and not in any way denied, put aside just because it doesn't fit. So yeah, so that's where I would go with what you said, and I love what you've said.
So the cause then, the cause seems to me to be kind of, well, the metaphor that popped into my mind, you said something, and I thought about, like when we're watching a wildlife show on telly, and somebody gets separated from the pack. The elephant, there's a baby elephant was being left behind, and the mum comes back for it. But on telly we were watching the other night, and it's that separation for me, the vulnerability.
Mm.
And we're separate from the rest because we're different. And we and our as a separate, if we were physically separate, then that would mean danger, as it does to animals on the plane. And yeah, so it's danger. And one of the things people talk about is amongst adoptees is what they call hypervigilance.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like on the edge all the time. You're on the edge because you're worried about being picked on by others or left out. And so there's to me there's like a physical separation there, and there's also like an emotional separate. So if you think that, and I'm thinking about, like, we've got two dogs. We've always had, mum and dad always had dogs. As me and my wife have got two dogs, and they are dogs 2 and 3, if you like. So the first one died 12 years ago, and another one. And I remember the first night that the puppy comes home, and them being, howling with anguish because they've lost they're not with their mum anymore. And that you talk quite a lot about this. You talk about the sense of self being vulnerable and insecure. And if we have been raised in, if that's our background, if there has been a sense of insecurity as we're a kid, then that insecurity stays with us.
Yeah. I think that makes so much sense. Because I think when because when the baby's born, it's entirely dependent, isn't it? Completely vulnerable for its physical survival. And what so at the same time as that baby is wired to behave in a way that is going to maintain the attention and the care of the people around it, there's as it gets, month by month, as it gets older, it starts to form around toddler time a concept, because the human brain is so extraordinary. It can create a concept of a thing that isn't there, that doesn't even exist in a way. Like the concept of a tree doesn't exist anywhere. It's just a mental representation of a tree. And so what happens for babies and toddlers is that this conceptual mind is beginning to develop, and into that conceptual mind comes a representation of the person, of the individual, which starts to represent, like, it starts to stand in for it, starts to become it. So when we, me, my, I, we refer, there's the references to that concept of myself, but it's being formed at the time where physical survival is still highly dependent on people around us. And so this emotional, physical vulnerability is all becoming wrapped up in this concept of me. And so the concept of me starts to take on this survival space, even though as an adult, I might be in a meeting, say, and you mentioned hypervigilance, I might be in a meeting, there's absolutely zero danger to the physical body, but the sense of me, this concept of me that might come under attack in a meeting, I might, you're wrong, Claire, or then people might be interrupting me, talking over me, indifferent to my comments. That is starting to feel under threat, and like when you mentioned rejection, it becomes a life and death thing. And I think it's, from all the work that we've seen in trauma, so many incredible pieces of research and writing. The more that concept of self develops within that blurring of physical survival, where as a totally vulnerable child, even a mum walking out of the door could be terrifying, because that is our food, our warmth, everything. So if you imagine that that's what's going on for all babies, when you think of the environment that some babies are in, it's so much more extreme and so much more vulnerable, and that all becomes wrapped up in this sense of what we are. And so from that perspective, there is a primal wound in all of us, we could say, to the extent that the idea of what we are is represented by a fragile, isolated, insecure, hypervigilant, conditioned belief system. And I think what's really like a breakthrough for all of us is that when that is believed, when that's taken as what we are, we go down the route of trying to fix that, trying to either like overtly trying to fix it, or our behavior is, again, you mentioned control, is our behavior is coming out of that and is trying to control the world, control other people, to limit vulnerability and limit rejection, limit anything that is going to trigger that insecurity. When that's taken as what we are, yes, it's like a living primal wound, isn't it, playing out. When and for me, the enormity of this conversation that you and I are in is that it says that is completely understandable, but that is not what you are. That is a mind-body system that has absorbed a program, essentially. And what you really are is the observation of that program, or is the life that is allowing essentially that program to play out. And those things don't get affected by the program. They're stable. So this now, I think, allows for both. It allows for the recognition of that vulnerability as a conditioned, learned system, that, and now life becomes about seeing, rather than trying to find ourselves, stabilize ourselves within that program. So rather than trying to be something, trying to turn that program into into me, stable, complete, it says, no, that is a learned pile of beliefs. It will never be stabilized. It will never, I won't ever find myself in there, because that's not where I am. And instead, so every interaction we have, we were sort of having a bit of a jokey conversation about electricity companies, even in there is the opportunity for that conditioned learning to be seen, and in being seen from the perspective that's not me, but it's just a program playing out. Now there is healing available, because we're not lost in it, we're seeing it. And it's such a powerful distinction.
Because I guess we're talking about, if I stripped it right down, we're talking about maybe two or three things. We're talking about who we truly are, versus this insecure character or ego. Well, that's it, isn't it? And that is that it? We're talking about, so who we truly are, plus our beliefs, makes us believe that we are this insecure character. That's one way of looking at it. Then the meta, on this program that we're doing at the moment, Claire, you used the word programming, and it's the difference between the TV screen, to use Rupert Spira's analogy, it's the difference between the TV screen and the program that's on the screen. I don't know which one makes more, which one is easiest for people that are not in the conversation that we're in to get. What is it? Is it the difference between the true self and the ego? The true self that is unconditioned, and then the conditioning comes along, and we fall for that conditioning because that's what we seem to do as humans, and we start to believe that we are this false idea, this self-concept.
Yeah. I think the tricky thing with calling it the ego is that it sounds like something that just needs to be got rid of, but actually, if we think of I quite like this sort of body mind system. I think when we talk about it in that way, we're not denying that there was a baby, and we're not denying that there may have been really frightening experiences that were happening, that were literally embedding in the body. The cells were duplicating within that stress environment, and so this conditioning of fear goes through the whole system, and it's that system, that mind-body system, that then sits in a meeting and that gets triggered or feels deeply ashamed or is hypervigilantly watching the reactions of people. It's that system that's there, and it seems to me that when life is lived from the attempt to find peace, find stability, find safety, it's lived through the lens of that stressed, frightened system, because that system is trying to, it's desperate to rediscover the peace that it knew in the womb, maybe, you know, like there's a deep knowing that there is something amiss here, and so it's sitting in a meeting trying to find peace, and it's trying to do that by being vigilant and by wanting to make sure that all its comments are listened to, and that it doesn't get rejected or insulted. You know, it's trying to find peace there. Of course, because that's what's been learned. It's learned that everything can come in from other people or be taken away, and so it's desperately trying to secure it. And what this conversation does is it says, like, it's a brick wall to that. It says that system trying to find peace in its relationships, in its interactions, in its daily life, it's never ever going to find it. It can't, because there will never be enough attention or praise or promotions, nothing. There will never be enough of that to secure that system. The only route to peace, genuine peace, is to see the to see that desperate attempt, and the moment that's seen, there's a shift of perspective, because we're not, the idea of what we are isn't any more lost within that search. It's now out of the search, watching it. And so what we could say there is, in that coming out of that unconscious space of desperation, what's happened is the idea of what we are is now liberated as a witnessing presence to the reactions, to the behavior, and it's understood. It's like deeply understood. Of course it would be like that. It's so natural that it would be like that, and it's not what I am.
It's the peace.
Yeah.
We're looking for the peace inside the stress.
Yeah.
Or inside the fear.
Yeah.
And that prolongs it. So that it's surrendering the search. The search for peace is the very thing that keeps the peace at arm's length, just out of reach. Like a guy doing the trick where they have a coin in the street, or a paper or a banknote in the street, and it's attached to a piece of fishing wire, you know, for a candid camera, and people keep on and searching.
Oh, right.
Searching for going down, reaching for the pound note, which is reaching for the piece. The candid camera operator just yanks it away. So the search, there's no peace in the war. The peace is only in surrender.
Peace is in the capacity to experience whatever emotion or experience is happening right at this moment.
Surrendering to the feeling, going head on into it.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about this, and the story that always comes to my mind when you do that, we talk about. So we're not trying to say go and live in go and live on a desert island and withdraw. We're saying no, go full into it. And the idea, the thing that always comes into my mind when you say that is so I was in a therapist chair about 6 years ago, and the idea of my birth mother rejecting me again popped into my head. So I imagine something that the therapist said about why I wasn't continuing the search for my birth mother, right? Not the search for happiness, the search for my birth mother, practical, right? I imagine something, the thought popped into my head of me, opening the door, her being there, opening the door of the room that I was in, her being there, and what I thought rejecting me again. That's what I thought at that stage. And I flushed with fear, then anger, then kind of running towards this. I'm going full on. I'm going full into this fear, because I'm not going to let these emotions around my birth mother's rejecting of me hold me back. So I kind of went full tilt into them, and which meant for me resuming the search. So at that stage, I only had her name. I didn't know whether she was alive or dead or where she was or anything. But that's what I did. I went full in. Now that wasn't a strategy or a mindset thing or an affirmation. It was something that happened in the heat of the moment. It was a decision that I came to. Well, it wasn't a decision, it was a no-brainer. It's just like, I'm not going to let this fear stop me, or I'm going to run into the fear, like the Marines do. Apparently they run towards the gunfire rather than.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit macho, all that stuff, isn't it?
Well, it's I think there's like the more gentle way,
Yeah.
maybe, is
Thanks, Claire.
is just step by step, step by tiny step, just seeing what is there. So in that moment in the therapist office, all really that was happening in that moment was a thought, wasn't it? It wasn't even a actual experience of rejection. It was a thought of rejection. And so that's what's available in that moment to be felt. It doesn't mean that things will be different along the way, as you know, when we're actually going through the stages of contact or anything. It just means that what was coming in that moment was intense fear and then anger, and so each of those were there to be allowed into the body and felt, and that's all it means, I think, really. Just the things that are there from moment to moment that's our healing. And in a way, what that does then is being in that safe space with the therapist, able, you know, with his or her support, to feel these emotions, which are maybe emotions that we haven't had the capacity to feel before. You know, we might have had numbing practices or distraction to try to do anything not to feel them, but now they're there, and they can sort of flood through the body and pass through like a storm, and because they've been felt, there's a opening space and there's a bit more capacity, and so that increase of capacity really is actually a change in the concept of what we are and of what reality is and of what the system is able to allow in. And so that puts the whole thing in a different reality, really, in which there's more availability, and so something else can come in and it can be the same thing. We have that as well, and then something else. And each time, rather than it's centering on a, like a sort of, like, you know, the sort of, like you mentioned, the Marines or the essay, like sort of barging through. It's the opposite of that, really. It's an undoing that allows for expansion of capacity bit by bit, so that really rejection loses its life and death grip. And so, to the extent that maybe if we are able to meet with our birth mother and she's not in a place where she's available, or you know, her capacity is really limited still, perhaps, that's can be held and honored, and it's because of the expansion that we've gone through at each stage to feel what was there to be felt. There's less and less defense, less and less protection. There's less and less that is seen as personal. And so when we meet her, we're love, really, and she doesn't have to be any different. There's no part of us that now depends on her.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So you talked about you know, a perspective change. What actually happened to me after I resumed the search is I found out, you know, it took me a while, a couple of years, but I found out that she died. And when I got my adoption file, there was a letter that she'd written, my birth mother had written to the adoption agency, asking me if she could buy me this teddy bear. And as I read the letter, I could feel her. I could feel her love for me. I could feel the desperation of her predicament, doing what she thought was the best for me by having me adopted, because my birth father didn't want to marry her, which was the thing in those days. It took in 1966, 67. And as I read that letter, you know, the tears flooded down my face, and I felt her love for me, and I also realized this nightmare scenario that I'd made up of you know, the nightmare story of rejection couldn't be further from the truth. And that was that was perhaps one of the most significant shifts in my perspective on this. So she went from villain to hero. My concern for myself dissolved into puddles of tears and empathy for her. And I felt that, and I felt a connection with her through a letter that she'd written 48 years before I'd read it, maybe, and never thought that I would see. And that perspective shift was the thing that was a big step along the way of healing, when we realized that the story we've made up is just a story.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I think where the what this conversation offers is that even if, and for some of the people who are listening to this, it might be the case that the letter is one of rejection, or we trace someone and they slam the door in our face. And the beauty of this conversation, which is just like an extension of what you've just been describing, is that it becomes clear that there is no, we're seeing in ourselves our own capacity, and we're seeing how limited that capacity is when it's coming from all the sort of life and death fear, the insecurity, the shame, the our beliefs about ourselves that are so weighed down and so constricted. We see that in ourselves. This is a journey. This is entirely about ourselves, and as we expand out of that limited space to that shift of perspective that you mentioned, we see for everyone else, they can't ever behave in any other different way. Everyone's behavior, it makes total sense for what is being believed in that moment. And so these things, no matter how deeply personal they might have appeared at the start, we start to see that from that sort of constricted idea of ourselves that is just a conditioned space. Nothing is personal. It's only about what's being believed, and those beliefs are so far removed from reality, but yet they look absolutely true. And so we become more safe through that expansion for everyone. Whatever their behavior, it's understood because we've seen it for ourselves, and that's the space in which we move even beyond forgiveness. It no matter what the other's response is to us, there's such a deep understanding of it. This is, who knows what centuries of conditioning, of confusion has led to this moment now for each of us. And
do you mean the unlearning here, what people talk about as unlearning?
For ourselves, yeah.
So this is the veils of our beliefs, us shedding our beliefs through perspective change. Is that?
It's the beliefs of what we are shedding themselves.
Okay. The beliefs of what we are shedding themselves. Yeah. We don't.
No one's doing it.
We don't do it.
No, there's no one there.
So this isn't. So this isn't affirmations, for example. That would be the opposite way of thinking. This isn't an affirmation. This is something that's happening naturally without us doing it as little selves.
So in a way, this is the opposite process to how the beliefs were acquired. So if we think of the baby wired to believe, really, that's how the mind is set up. Beliefs being acquired all over the place, all the time, about everything, looking to the authorities around, for how to navigate and survive in the world. So acquiring beliefs, which become this construct then of self and other and reality, through which all behavior comes, all experience happens. And as long as as long as it looks like survival is at the heart of that, then that's what will be maintained. But the moment really that someone comes into this conversation, or hopefully, you know, they listen to this podcast and it becomes like there's like a sort of resonance. Oh shit, yeah, that's just a view. It's just a film playing out, really. And then from that moment, the moment, you know, one of the things we were talking about with Sid Banks is what someone said to Sid, you're not really insecure, you just think you are. That like the moment there's that thought, the creative power of the mind in creating a reality, then now we're sort of on the way down. We're and the world is showing what beliefs there are that are completely toxic, even, really, we could say, completely harmful, completely deluded. And back down the system goes, in a way, the beliefs just sort of dissolving because reality is continually showing what's not true. And yet there's still a maturity, and now there's a sort of maturity of relationship to reality and to the mind and to mental creations and constructs that is the basis of sanity, I would say, and the basis of a you know, you mentioned that snowball. Like now the snowball really is melting. Yeah, it's like melting, each bit melting until just at the center of it is just presence, just the most simple localization of presence in a body, listening, open, available. Yeah.
So this conversation really is like an industrial heater, taking an industrial heater to the snowball of the trauma ball, right?
I think so.
Or well, that a bloke like me taking a macho thing, I'm gonna you probably, like, you know, you're gonna probably bring up something way softer. So the other thing is this, just to we've name checked Sydney Banks. So this guy, Sydney Banks, he was a Scottish welder who was also adopted, right? He was adopted, and he was he had this enlightenment experience, and as Clare said, somebody said to him, "You're not insecure, Sid. You just think you are," and that was the catalyst for his shift in perspective, which led him to, which he then shared with the world and with other teachers. So he became a reluctant teacher, didn't he? I don't know how reluctant he was. He became a teacher, and he taught others, and that's the way that I found Clare, because she was studying with another one, a second generation teacher. So check out people. Sydney Banks is Sydney with a Y. He's no longer with us. I guess he'd be probably in his mid-90s if he was still alive. But yeah, that's Sydney Banks. In the show notes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to link to Clare's website and podcast. So it's Clare without an I in Clare, without an A in Dimond. But you don't need to remember all that. It'll be on the show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Clare?
Maybe just to say, I mean, I really recognize how balmy a lot of this can sound, and But if there is anything, if there's anything in what we've been saying, like even just the tiniest little thing that you just think, oh, that's interesting, or something is intriguing, or something like really resonates even slightly, then I would say follow that, because that's an opening to a world that is so it's unimaginable from within the confines of what we believe ourselves to be and what we believe the world to be. But follow that little gleam, and it opens up a space that is that in which nothing has changed, really, like literally nothing has changed, but there's a totally different understanding of what you are in it.
Yeah.
And it might, we've mentioned, Simon's mentioned Sid, and there's so many brilliant teachers in this, that just have a little search around to see who resonates for you. And there's so much available now.
So the glimmer of light that Claire's drawing your attention to, it is the light at the end of the tunnel, and that only, in my case, that I only saw that light when I turned round. So if I'd kept on going down the trauma tunnel, life would have just got darker and darker. But luckily, I find some stuff, and I turned around. And when I turned around, there was still light. So if you're listening now, an hour into this podcast, the chances that you've seen some light, because the other people will have signed off from our balminess, from our shared balminess, probably after about 30 seconds, if we can say. But we're sharing, we're just sharing what we've learned that has kindled that light, that light of hope, and and as that light has grown, then and continues to grow, right? It's the last time I spoke to Claire, she went, just stay curious, Simon, just stay curious. And that's fanning the flame of this light, so the light grows. It's not being it's not being happy with 60 watts. I don't know. I'm losing myself in the metaphors. Thanks so much, Claire, for coming on and bringing your wisdom to this. And I'm delighted to say that you brought a completely different perspective to this on me when you said that, well, we've all got some sort of primal wound in because of this separation from ourselves. So the light is the means by which we rejoin the real world and rejoin the pack, I guess.
Yeah, we come back in. Yeah. Oh, so nice to be here, Simon. Thank you for
delight. Thanks a lot, listeners, and check out what Claire's doing on her podcast. She does one every day, and it is superb stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Angel.
Well, we won't see you soon. We'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.